Well, buckle up folks, because just when you thought international trade couldn't get any more bewildering, former President Trump decided to slap a whopping 50% tariff on steel and aluminum imports from Canada. Yes, Canada. Our friendly, hockey-loving, syrup-producing neighbors to the north. This wasn't a gentle nudge, it was a full-blown 50% take that, kind of economic wallop. We're talking about the foundational materials that build our cars, our buildings, and apparently, our diplomatic headaches. The sheer audacity of such a steep tariff sent tidal waves across industries on both sides of the border. These weren't just your garden-variety trade adjustments. These were the economic equivalent of a sudden unprovoked moose charge. A 50% tariff is an incredibly aggressive move, designed to inflict maximum impact, ostensibly to protect American industries. However, when applied to a country like Canada, it felt less like protectionism and more like a declaration of economic hostilities. The timing seemed plucked from a hat, leaving businesses scrambling and international relations experts reaching for the strong stuff. The immediate reaction was one of widespread consternation and utter disbelief. Markets, which famously detest uncertainty, did their usual panicked dance. Businesses that relied on Canadian steel and aluminum suddenly faced a massive spike in their costs. Think about it, your raw materials budget just got hit by a 50% sledgehammer. This means rethinking entire production lines, potentially delaying projects, and inevitably, considering how much of that new cost gets passed on to consumers. Interestingly, this whole tariff drama unfolded against a backdrop of legal challenges to Trump's broader tariff powers. A U.S. Court of International Trade ruling stated that the former president didn't possess unbounded authority to impose many tariffs, but these specific Canadian ones remained a clear and present danger. Understandably, Canada was not amused. These tariffs weren't just a minor trade irritant, they were perceived as a direct assault on Canada's core industries. Steel and aluminum represent significant employment, economic stability, and national pride. To have your biggest trading partner and closest ally suddenly treat these vital sectors like a piñata at a particularly aggressive birthday party is, to put it mildly, insulting. The depth of Canada's anger stemmed from a few key factors. Firstly, Canada was the largest foreign supplier of steel and aluminum to the United States. The tariffs felt like a betrayal of that relationship, a punitive measure against a friend. Imagine being the #1 supplier of maple syrup to a pancake house, and then the owner suddenly declares your syrup is 50% too syrupy and slaps a massive tax on it. You'd be miffed, and rightly so. Even Prime Minister Mark Carney noted ongoing adverse effects on the trading relationship with the U.S. This highlights the lingering resentment and the very real damage these policies inflict. The trust that underpins the massive trade relationship was being severely eroded by these seemingly arbitrary and hostile actions from Washington. Ultimately, the feeling north of the border was one of profound betrayal. The U.S. and Canada share the longest undefended border in the world, a testament to decades of cooperation, mutual respect, and integrated economies. These tariffs felt like a gratuitous punch from that supposed friend, undermining not just current economic ties, but the very foundation of that historic and generally peaceful relationship. Faced with this economic aggression, Canada wasn't just going to sit there and politely sip its Tim Hortons. The Canadian government made it quite clear that they were considering retaliatory measures. This wasn't playground squabbling. This was serious economic statecraft. When someone throws a 50% tariff grenade at your key industries, you don't just send a strongly worded letter, you start looking for ways to return the favor. Initially, there was talk of Canada leveraging its significant oil exports as a potential oil weapon. Canada is a major oil producer and a crucial supplier to the United States. However, wielding the oil weapon is a complicated business. While undoubtedly a powerful card to hold, the focus soon shifted towards a sector where the integration, and therefore the potential for targeted pain, was even more acute. That more potent option was the automotive sector. Canada exports a staggering $65 billion worth of cars and auto parts to the United States annually. Targeting this sector with retaliatory tariffs would send shockwaves directly into the heart of the American manufacturing base, and crucially, into the daily lives of American consumers. Suddenly, the price of that new pickup truck or family SUV could skyrocket, or worse, the vehicles themselves might become harder to find. The automotive sector was seen as a particularly powerful lever because of the incredibly intertwined nature of the North American auto industry. Parts and components crisscross the border multiple times before a single vehicle rolls off the assembly line. A Canadian tariff on U.S. auto parts or even a slowdown at the border could cripple production in American plants almost immediately. Canada knew that by targeting autos, they weren't just hurting American companies, they were demonstrating the folly of disrupting such a deeply integrated system. The The North American auto industry isn't just a collection of factories in different countries, it's a marvel of logistical choreography. Parts for a single car might cross the US-Canada border half a dozen times or more before that vehicle is finally ready for the showroom. A fender stamped in Ontario might be attached to a chassis assembled in Michigan with an engine block cast in Mexico using aluminum that, ironically, might have originated in Canada. It's a delicate dance of just-in-time delivery and shared expertise, honed over decades to maximize efficiency and minimize costs. This system is the backbone of auto manufacturing for the entire continent. Now imagine throwing a giant tariff wrench into those finely tuned gears. Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum were already causing headaches, but if Canada retaliated with its own tariffs on American cars and auto parts, that delicate dance would turn into a chaotic mosh pit. The free flow of components, essential for keeping assembly lines running smoothly, would grind to a halt or become prohibitively expensive. Suddenly, that fender from Ontario costs 25% more, or that engine part from Ohio is stuck in customs. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a recipe for industrial paralysis, threatening to cripple the entire free-flow supply chain that automakers depend on for their very existence. The potential consequences of such disruptions are, frankly, terrifying for anyone who makes, sells or buys a car. Firstly, costs would inevitably skyrocket. If every part is subject to new taxes, the final price tag on that new vehicle is going to inflate like a poorly supervised bouncy castle. Secondly, production would plummet. If manufacturers can't get the parts they need, or can't afford them, assembly lines will slow down or stop altogether. So, with Canada threatening to target the US auto industry in response to Trump's aggressive tariffs, North America found itself at a precarious crossroads. The potential outcomes of this escalating dispute essentially boiled down to two starkly different paths, each with profound consequences. On one hand, there was the grim possibility of a full-blown trade war, a scenario where tariffs beget more tariffs, and economic pain spirals out of control. On the other hand, there was the hope for a negotiated deal, perhaps brokered under the intense pressure of industries on both sides of the border, desperately trying to avoid mutual destruction. The stakes in this high-stakes poker game couldn't have been higher. Let's paint a picture of the full-blown trade war scenario, and trust me, it's not pretty. Imagine widespread factory slowdowns and closures in the auto sector, not just in one country, but across the continent due to the integrated supply chain. This would inevitably lead to significant job losses. We're talking thousands, potentially tens of thousands of workers in both Canada and the US finding themselves out of work. Beyond the auto sector, the ripple effects would spread throughout the economy, hitting suppliers, logistics companies and local businesses that depend on a thriving manufacturing base. Consumer confidence would plummet, investment would dry up, and both nations could find themselves facing a serious economic downturn, all because of a squabble over metal. The alternative, and the path that rational minds were desperately hoping for, was a negotiated deal. This wouldn't necessarily be a happy kumbaya moment, but more likely a grudging handshake born out of economic necessity. The immense pressure from affected industries would become a powerful motivating force for politicians to find an off-ramp. Businesses hate uncertainty and escalating costs even more than they love tax breaks. The prospect of seeing their profits evaporate and their supply chains collapse would surely lead to some very loud, very insistent phone calls to Washington and Ottawa, urging a return to something resembling sanity. Even if this particular tariff tantrum eventually subsides, perhaps through a negotiated settlement or a change in political winds, the damage inflicted on the US-Canada trade relationship can linger like an unwelcome houseguest. Trust, once broken, is notoriously difficult to repair. Businesses that have been burned by sudden, arbitrary tariffs might think twice about future investments or relying too heavily on cross-border supply chains, even if the immediate threat is removed. This kind of uncertainty is poison to long-term economic planning. The memory of this showdown, where core industries were threatened over what many saw as political posturing, will undoubtedly cast a long shadow over future interactions. The entire episode serves as a stark reminder of just how crucial stable and predictable trade relationships are for the economic prosperity of North America. We're not just talking about abstract economic theories here, we're talking about jobs, the affordability of everyday goods, and the ability of our industries to compete on a global scale. When trade becomes a political football, subject to the whims of leaders rather than the logic of economics, everyone suffers. The integrated nature of our economies, especially in sectors like automotive manufacturing, means that stability isn't just a nice-to-have. It's an absolute necessity for continued growth and innovation on both sides of the 49th parallel. This whole saga should prompt us all to consider the broader implications that extend far beyond just cars, steel, and aluminum. It's a lesson in the interconnectedness of global economies and the inherent fragility of international agreements when they collide with nationalist impulses. What happens between the US and Canada doesn't just stay between the US and Canada, it sends signals to the rest of the world about America's reliability as a trading partner and the stability of the international trading system. If even your closest ally and largest trading partner isn't safe from sudden punitive measures, then who is? It's a question that should make everyone a little uneasy. So as we look to the future, the big question remains, will lessons be learned from this economically damaging squabble? One can only hope that a cooler, more rational approach to our most important trading relationship will prevail, because frankly, nobody needs this kind of drama again anytime soon.